We're beginning Chapter 14, The Venice Magic Dutch Boys. One of the most puzzling questions about 9/11 has to do with the competency and skill displayed by the terrorist pilots. What's curious is that Atta and Marwan's flight school instructors in Florida said they were poor students and poor pilots. The impression created was that the duo were zealots, brand new commercial pilots on a misbegotten mission. Despite this testimony, numerous observers cite the pilots at the controls of the hijacked jets for a cool efficiency which provoked a grudging respect for their professional talents. Was Atta a better pilot than they let on? Their capacity to operate the aircraft was substantial, said Attorney General Ashcroft. It's very clear that these orchestrated, coordinated assaults on our country were well conducted and conducted in a technically proficient way. An ex-military pilot told us they swooped down on the World Trade Center like a pair of fighter jets. The terrorists were flying a bulky 200-ton Boeing 767 jetliner so smoothly, they obviously had considerable flying skills. This hits on all three 9/11 buildings were damned difficult, and not at all the stuff of new commercial pilots, he continued. It's possible they were former flight pilots cycled through Florida flight schools used as a cutout. Investigating the large-scale training of possible terrorist pilots would become a crucial law enforcement concern. An FBI list of more than 220 people wanted for questioning as possible associates of the hijackers contained at least 32 pilots, 5 student pilots, and 12 aircraft mechanics. Dozens of those sought for questioning were trained as pilots. Remember, your legend is your cover story, the lie that holds together long enough to let you slip away. Mohomed Atta's Islamic extremist legend had begun falling apart in South Florida's bars and strip joints, just as Lee Harvey Oswald's communist legend did when news of his presence at anti-Castro paramilitary camps in Louisiana came out. Let's take a look at the legend of Rudy Deckers as flight school owner to see if it too beginning to fray around the edges. For his part, Deckers professed no concern over his role in the tragedy. Summing up his sentiments about it, he said, "At the beginning, it was bad. We had some death threats. Now, basically, all we hear is good news. People come up and say, aren't you the guy who owns Huffman Aviation? And they shake hands with me. Just as the magic bullet theory, one bullet passing through multiple bodies intact and unharmed, was the only way the Warren Commission could sell its lone gunman story. The FBI's version of what happened in Venice relies on similarly twisted logic. It's called the Magic Dutch Boy theory, and it's required to explain how all those terrorist pilots could have been at 2 separate Dutch-owned flight schools and have it just be another freak coincidence. Deckers, who is, of course, Dutch, had purchased Huffman in the year before the terrorists began to arrive. While everyone else was pondering the internet bust, Atta and Marwan spent their days in small Cessnas building time. The terrorist duo, practicing touch-and-goes in the humid September air on Florida's Gulf Coast, were joined by a third terrorist, Siad al-Jarrah, who moved in next door to Huffman and Kruithoff's Florida Flight Training Center. Like Deckers' school, this second Venice flight school had also recently changed ownership. The new owner was, of all things, another Dutch national, Arnie Kurithoff was from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Other members of the Hamburg cadre came too. Bald-headed Zacharias Mazoari was in Venice, and Ramzi bin al-Shib paid money to attend, as well as others we will hear of later. Dutch national Kurithoff's purchase of the second of the two Venice flight schools, while countryman Deckers purchased the other, had led to the two being dubbed the Magic Dutch Boys. But they've got more than a nickname. They've got a whole theory named after them. The notion that it is just coincidence that almost all of the key members of Atta's Hamburg cadre came to Florida to learn to fly at two separate, recently purchased Dutch-owned flight schools at the tiny Venice airport is called the Magic Dutch Boy theory. Someday, perhaps, it will be taught in college in the history of the 21st century. The chief tenet of the Magic Dutch Boy theory is two foreign nationals purchasing flight schools at the same airport at about the same time, which are soon hubcap deep in Arab terrorist pilot wannabes, is just a magical or freak coincidence. It is the official position of the chief investigative agency of the United States government, the FBI. Others disagree. Two Dutch boys buying adjacent flight schools, which shortly thereafter get overrun by terrorists, is one damn Dutch boy too many, growled one nationally known law enforcement figure. It's untidy. It seems kind of odd when Deckers bought his flight school here, said Coy Jacobs, owner of Mooney Aviation, because the only other flight school in town is owned by Arnie Kurithoff. And he's Dutch too, and the odds of that are pretty slim. Bob Mudge is the genial editor of the local Venice Gondolier, he told us. I've heard a lot of rumors that I haven't been able to substantiate about connections between them and other businesses here, and entities and agencies outside the area. It's certainly something you have to say is a very interesting coincidence. The appearance of two Dutch nationals purchasing flight schools months apart isn't just a freak coincidence belonging in Ripley's Believe It or Not. Then the FBI is covering up something in Venice. Were Rudy Deckers and Arnie Kurithoff acting as cutouts in an effort to provide that ever-popular plausible deniability? Was Huffman funneling their trainees into further training? Could the CIA have been running a covert operation in Venice, training pilots for Osama bin Laden in an effort to penetrate his organization that somehow had gone horribly wrong? Someday they'll be adding a Magic Dutch Boy wing next to the Magic Bullet wing of the Secret History Museum. We came across a business profile written about Rudy Deckers months before the 9/11 attack. The two flight schools at Venice Municipal Airport catered almost exclusively to international students, said the Sarasota Herald. Rudy Deckers had trained some 800 foreign students at his school during the past 2 years. Deckers told reporters he had 200 students at this facility at any given time, and estimated 80% were foreign. Venice residents said Florida training also had numerous international students. Deckers, 44 at the time of the attack, was born in Holland and began flying in 1981, in between working as a computer salesman and real estate broker. In 1985, he earned his European commercial pilot's license and left Holland for the warm and pretty blue waters of Florida Gulf Coast, where he settled with his wife Astrid in Naples and quickly fell in love with the States. Deckers does have some financial support from sources other than customers, reported the paper, citing a retired Naples insurance magnate as one big backer. Deckers also owned Ambassador Airways in Naples, the story said. He had been operating charter flight services for 9 years. The financial support from sources other than customers, the article references, is Wallace J. Hillard, a 70-year-old retired insurance executive, originally from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Even before the tragedy of September 11th, both men's dealings had lifted eyebrows at the Venice airport. Though they got a free ride from the national media, that was not the case with people at the airport, where, among their aviation peers, a cloud of suspicion hung over their operations. Arnie Kruithoff was expected to testify at the trial of the so-called 20th hijacker, Zacharias Massoai. We learned where he would also presumably be grilled about his relationship with Rudy Deckers, as well as his partner Pascal Schreier, a German national living in Munich. Their joint company, Aviation Aspirations, provided both financial assistance and also what the company called a mentor program. About their mentoring program, their literature said, the help is both financial and practical. We provide one-to-one practical assistance from experienced professional pilots, our mentors, whom we have established throughout the world. The company's motto was better training because we care. We wondered what they meant by special mentoring. Was a mentor the same as a handler? Was Aviation Aspirations a front for recruiting intelligence assets in the guise of training people to fly? Deckers and Kruithoff insisted they had never met each other until they separately decided running a flight school in Venice seemed a good idea. The truth, however, would turn out to be an altogether different proposition. I knew Rudy Deckers, said Tom Hammersley, former chief flight instructor at Kruithoff's school. My former employer, Arnie Kruithoff, and Rudy Deckers, they are both Dutch. They go back a long time. So Deckers was lying. When people lie, it's usually for a reason. Another odd link between Deckers and Kruithoff was a German named Pascal Schreier, who had recruited students for them in, among other places, Hamburg, where Atta's Hamburg cadre was based. Probably just a freak coincidence. I know Pascal Schreier too, Hammersley told us, when we asked about him. I worked with him as a part of Florida Flight Training Center. He's a German boy, and he did a lot of recruiting of students over in Europe, sending them over to Arnie. Although the two Venice Dutch boys ran what were supposedly competing flight schools, strangely, Pascal Schreier appears to have been in business with both of them. He was an officer of a company called Florida Sunrise Aviation at the Venice airport. Deckers was an officer and company at the same airport called Sunrise Aviation. Another freak coincidence? Rudy Deckers said Atta and his sidekick just showed up at his facility one day. He had instead been actively marketing his flight school in Germany at the exact time Mohomed Atta and his terrorist cell left Hamburg and moved to Florida. Deckers began an aggressive European marketing campaign right after the purchase of Huffman, said a story headlined, New Owners of Huffman Aviation Have Global Presence in the Venice Gondolier. Deckers talked to the paper about his plans for a newly purchased company. The world is my working place, he boasted. I won't forget Venice, but I'm going to market through the world. Germany, France, Belgium. That's our goal, to get people to come here from all over the world. His plans were apparently successful. They soon changed the makeup of his two flight schools. Foreign nationals came to account for over 80% of the student pilots enrolled with him. His two schools were training 400 foreign nationals a year, said the paper. After Atta moved from Germany to train with Deckers's flight school in Venice, at least 4 other members of the same terrorist cell moved there to train as pilots as well, according to German prosecutors. We met a wizened old pilot who's flown in the area for over 15 years. 2 years ago, said Danny Schultz. He noticed a change in the type of pilot trainees. Many times I went to lunch with these folks, and some of them could hardly speak English, from various countries in the Middle East. There was a recent influx of these type of trainees. Before, you'd never seen such Middle Eastern traffic. Then one day, all of a sudden they're marching across the tarmac. What if Mohomed hadn't gone to the mountain, but instead the mountain, in the guise of portly Deckers, had come to Mohomed? If Atta was in contact with Deckers's recruiters while still in Hamburg, instead of just showing up in Venice, that could explain statements by officials early on that the key to unraveling the pilot might not lie in the United States, but in Germany. Rudy Deckers, as we've seen, has Saudi cover, but it went well beyond a contract with Saudi Arabian Airlines. The French newspaper Le Monde reported that Osama bin Laden's Geneva, Switzerland-based brother Yeslam had also been sending student pilots to Venice for training. Yeslam bin Laden is one of 3 half-brothers of Osama bin Laden who head the Saudi bin Laden Group, the parent company of the family's far-flung business ventures, which include construction, telecommunications, and finance. He has been called a key figure in the family's business empire. Swiss police questioned Yeslam because one of his companies, Avcon Air Charter, had offered flight training to clients at Venice flight schools attended by some of the hijackers, as a result of what Le Monde called a still unexplained coincidence. The pilots of Yeslam bin Laden's company trained at Huffman Aviation in Florida, the paper stated. I didn't choose that flight school, Yeslam protested. I don't have contact with my half-brother since over 20 years ago. Swiss magazine Le Hebdo reported that Swiss federal inspectors were seeking information on the activities of several bin Laden family companies, including Geneva-based Saudi Investment Company, a financial clearinghouse for the family's international investments, and Avcon Business Jets, Saudi Arabia, which owned a fleet of private jets which it leased to clients. In a rare statement, the head of the bin Laden family business explained that he had only invested in aviation because I am passionately fond of flying. But, he said, he was also passionately fond of tennis, skiing, and the cinema. Yeslam said that Avcon rents planes, provides services to clients, but didn't participate in the instruction of pilots. Yet Mohamed Atta and his sidekick bodyguard Marwan had told the chief flight instructor at one of their schools that their future plans were with the nationally owned Saudi airline. I asked them, Atta and Marwan, specifically about what their goals were, and they said they wanted to learn to fly so that they could go fly for Saudi. For people coming from that part of the world, Saudi would be the premier airline of the Middle East, stated Tom Hammersley, the terrorists duo's chief flight instructor at Jones Aviation. Then we learned that, incredibly, 4 additional 9/11 terrorist suspects at Decker's school had fled the U.S. in haste just days before the attack. 3 of the fleeing students were Saudi nationals. All 4 had been training at one of Decker's 2 flight schools. Aviation observers at the airport shook their heads. It heightened the sense of intrigue which swirled around the controversial Deckers. News of the additional terror suspect school broke in accounts of FBI raids on a house in the Miami area. FBI agents spent 2 days in South Florida searching an unoccupied Palm Beach County home, which had been hastily abandoned by a Saudi family just 2 days before the attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Saudi Mohomed Azlari and his family had first moved into the home in question in July 2000, the FBI said. His son was a student at Huffman Aviation at the same time hijackers Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shahi studied there. The other three new terror suspects had been training at the Deckers-owned Ambassador Aviation in Naples, 100 miles south of Venice. One of the three fled the U.S. in haste just days before the attack. The sad story of 22-year-old Marwan Mohammed Shemina provides a glimpse into the intrigue going on at Deckers' schools. Shemina, who told school officials his father worked for the United Nations in Rome, abruptly ceased training and disappeared under mysterious circumstances days before the 9/11 attack, stated Danielle Clark, a former flight training executive at the school. School officials who spoke with the FBI about Shemina's sudden departure, she said, as well as the departure of 2 Saudi student pilots just before the attack, Kamran Hussein, traveling on a UK passport, and Ahmad Badri, who had a Swedish passport. Unlike most student pilots who are enthused to learn to fly, Marwan Semiza was an extremely reluctant 19-year-old student pilot, said Danielle. He's holed up in his hotel room and wouldn't emerge to begin flight lessons until after his mother had been dispatched from Rome to buck up her son. Marwan didn't want to be here, Clark said. He arrived 2 weeks late, took 2 lessons, and then took sick and stayed in his hotel room for 10 days. When his father called the school, I asked him if we should ship him back. Absolutely not, he said. He's over there to achieve something, and he's not coming back. Shortly thereafter, his mother arrived, a Libyan woman wearing traditional Arab clothing who lived in Rome, and Marwan began taking flight training again, but without any enthusiasm, said Clark. He didn't look at all happy. He appeared very depressed, and only brightened up when talking about playing football, soccer, in the streets of Rome. So one day I asked him, "What is it with you?" I said, "You don't know how lucky you are to have your parents paying for flight training." "I want to be a football player," he told her. She asked him if he would like her to relay his desires to his parents. "No, they want me to be a pilot," he replied. "You don't understand. I don't have a say in the matter." Then, the week before the attack, and just 2 days shy of completing his courses and getting his multi-engine license, Marwan Shemina's father, who had previously been insistent in his son's staying and taking lessons, abruptly commanded him to leave. "It's ridiculous. Like dropping out of college a few days before the end of your last semester," she explained. Danielle implored the father to let his son finish his courses. "Couldn't you extend his stay just 2 days so he can finish his multi-rating license?" she asked. His reply, "Absolutely not." On the unhappy youth's final day at the school, Danielle asked if he was looking forward to going back to Italy. Even today, Marwan Shemiza's reply is chilling. He had another change of plans, he told Danielle. He was headed for what authorities later called the assembly point for most of the hijackers. "I'm not going back to Italy," Marwan said. "I'm going to Boston." "What? Why are you going to Boston?" she asked. "Because I have to," he said. You don't understand. I don't have a choice. Several days after his sudden departure, the hotel he'd been staying at called the school, asked what they should do with his clothes and several very large trunks, all of which he left behind, as if in a haste. Marwan Shemiza disappeared on September 6, 2001, taking a flight to Boston. It is not known for sure if he was on board any of the hijacked planes. The school has not heard from him, but he was telling the truth about one thing. His father did work at the UN. 80% of his tuition was being paid for by the United Nations, which was where he said his father worked, said Danielle. I took it to be a perk of his father's job at the UN. There was something else strange, too. The FBI had been more interested in the 2 Saudi students that disappeared. They had not appeared concerned with Shemiza. But when they returned the school's records to us, there was only one file missing, Marwan Shemiza's, said Danielle Clark. That file never reappeared, although we are supposed to have it by law. We were able to get a brief interview with the financier, whose money purchased both Deckers' flight schools, 70-year-old Wallace Hillard of Naples, Florida. One of the things we asked him to explain was the large number of Arab students in his flight schools marching across the tarmac. Hillard angrily denied reports of the number of Arab students with a terrorist bent who had flocked so far inexplicably to his and Deckers' flight schools. He said, I'm sorry. What you are saying is grossly untrue. I believe that there were 2 Arab students, not 22, only 2. There were 2, period, 2 total. In point of fact, news of the 4 additional terror suspects brought the current total of 9/11 cadre terrorists known to have been enrolled at flight schools owned by the Magic Dutch Boys to 8. Rudy Deckers' figure alone stood at 5. We also asked Hillard about his associations with persons of clearly dubious repute, Deckers among them. I've done some stupid things, Hillard replied. I have done some very stupid things with airplanes, and it has cost me lots of money. One of the stupid things Hillard is referring to was the seizure of a Learjet he owned on the tarmac of Orlando Executive Airport in early July of 2000. DEA agents brandishing automatic weapons surrounded the plane before discovering 43 pounds of heroin on board. That deal had cost somebody lots of money. We hoped it wasn't Hillard. And that's it for chapter 14.